First of all, I would like to start to saying thank you and to presenting Antonio Gomez de Pino, who is actually the initiator of this overall event. Unfortunately, he's not here with us today because he has important duty in his own country, but without him, this conference, this exhibition wouldn't happen, because it started with the idea to bring his collection, his valuable collection, to VARTAI Gallery. And step by step, all this event grew to the concept that now it's called Moi non Moi. I would like to start introducing Amer Abbas. Amer is curator of this exhibition. Amer is living and working in Vienna as independent curator. He is also a founder of Werner Art Foundation in Vienna, the hot spot for young artists to gather, to collaborate, and between cities and together. Hope we will have collaboration with Vilnius one day as well. Amer is also an owner of private gallery in Vienna as well. Werner Poschauko. Werner Poschauko, he's an artist, curator, student of Maria Lassnig, long-time serving assistant to Maria Lassnig until her death in 2014. Werner Poschauko also is a board member of the Maria Lassnig Foundation, thanks to which we were able to bring the drawings to the exhibition as well. Joana Baião. Joana is an author of monography of Maria Vieira da Silva. She's a researcher in the Institute of History of Art in Lisbon. She is well now doing a post-doctoral project in Paris. Setteducati, he represents Louise Bourgeois. Setteducati was a student of Louise Bourgeois. He met Louise Bourgeois back in 1970s when he was studying in visual art school. He was assisting under her direction, and later on has some projects with her as well. I would like to say that for us, it's really important that overall the event starts with this talk. Because when hearing the personal story, when realizing the depth of this artist, the depth of the art that they did, you will be able to see it differently. You feel it differently. We believe that it's an amazing exhibition that is waiting for you right after the talk, and I would like to start. And Joana, she will be first. She will be presenting Maria Vieira da Silva, and I just want to say that it's open and it's really for the discussion. You can raise questions. We will try to be relaxed as much as possible. So, Joana, the word is yours.
Firstly, I would like to greet the audience and congratulate the gallery for organizing this exhibition, who gathers three very important artists, Vieira da Silva, Maria Lassnig, and Louise Bourgeois. I also have to express my thanks, special thanks to Laura and to Toma, and to the gallery staff, and to the president of Vieira da Silva Foundation, Antonio Gomez de Pino, for inviting me to be here today, sharing some words about Vieira. It's really a great honor. I'm so sorry because I am very nervous, and because English is not my mother tongue, I will read, but please, if you need to ask something, please do it. I start recalling some biographic data. Maria Helena Vieira da Silva was born in Lisbon in June 1908, in a higher bourgeoisie family. Her early childhood was marked by the death of her father in 1911. She was only 3 years old, but she would recall this event as the first moment of consciousness of the ephemeral. Only child educated at home, she developed an early interest for fine arts and music. At the age of 11, she started to have drawing and painting private lessons. After 1924, still in Lisbon, she had classes of modeling, and she attended the anatomy lessons given by the medicine school to the art students. That's where she produced those anatomic drawings. In that phase, she was very interested in representing and exploring the main structures of the human body, the bones, the muscles. At the age of 19, Maria Helena Vieira da Silva was with her artistic progression. Then she decided to go to Paris, the mythic capital of arts. Her mother supported this decision, and they both settled in the French capital in the beginning of 1928. In Paris, Maria Helena began to study sculpture, first with Antoine Bourdelle at the Académie de la Grande Chaumière, and then with Charles Espiau at the Scandinavian Academy. Let me say that Vieira didn't wanted to be a sculptor. In this stage of demand for a personal language, she wanted to avoid the tendency to copy the styles of other painters, and she considered that sculpture and modeling lessons were an important way to exercise the observation and representation of reality. Unfortunately, she destroyed her sculptural works. That was at the Académie de la Grande Chaumière in Paris in 1928 that Vieira met the Hungarian painter Abbas, with whom she would marry in 1930. The two painters would recall that the attraction they quickly felt for each other had art as its catalyst and main stimulus. And I believe that, in addition to the shared love for art, there was one other important factor that contributed to the deep bond that developed between them. They both came from peripheral European countries, Hungary and Portugal, and shared a certain feeling of displacement, a condition which was accentuated by their stateless status after their marriage because of bureaucratic reasons, and by their exile in Brazil during World War II from 1940 to 1947. This feeling of displacement was only truly counterbalanced by the place they have found in each other and in painting. And for that reason, Vieira would claim that her life came down to my mother, her pad, the easel and the canvas or the paper, c'est tout. No father, no children, no brothers or sisters, nothing, c'est tout. That's all. That was during the 30s that Vieira da Silva conceived the first series of paintings that she decided to preserve, and in which she announces for the first time her pictorial way, the exploration of speciality, of the possibilities of releasing the two-dimensional representation through the painting itself. Her paintings are then characterized by the representation of bridges, doors, windows, walls that sometimes interact with figures or objects. All those elements contribute to the definition of a physical and conceptual space. The development of her work is marked by the progressive protagonism of the structures that will be the basis of her pictorial language. The grills, the spiral, the perspective lines, elements that allow to compartmentalize and to multiply the representational spaces. On that period, right before the World War II, despite her huge activity in Paris, Vieira keeps a close contact to her birth country. She and her pad settled in Lisbon for some months in 1935 and again in 1939. In 1940, aware and worried about the political situation in Europe, the couple decided to leave to Brazil. Let me remember that Abbas was Jewish and they both became stateless after their marriage, so they didn't feel secure in Europe, nor even in Portugal, which kept a neutral political position during the conflict. The works produced during the exile reflect Vieira's attempt of habituation to a new environment, a new routine, new friendships. In this period, she conceives little drawings where she represents herself, her pad, her memories of Lisbon. These works have a great sense of intimacy. But the permanent awareness of the violent war disturbs Vieira. Some paintings transmit with great expression her anguish in the face of the dramatic news that come from Europe. Let me highlight works like Le Métro, painted sometime after the first threats in Paris, or the very dynamic, disturbing and dramatic composition Le Désastre, The Disaster. Even in works not directly related with the war, the artist explores her nightmares and fears through a darker and almost surrealistic universe, as happens in this painting, Tragic Maritime History, or The Shipwreck, based on a Portuguese book from the 18th century. But her work in this period is not only based on the tragedy. Painted before the end of the war, La Libération de Paris, the liberation of Paris, is a sincere cry of hope. Vieira believes now at the end of the conflict and postulates through this picture an idea that she will always follow. Beauty will save the world. After the end of the war, Vieira and her partner remained for 2 more years in Brazil, where they still have some commitments, like the contract to execute a large panel of tiles for the Faculty of Agronomy of Rio de Janeiro, which some drafts are now exhibited here in Vilnius. The couple returns to France in 1947. Vieira exhibits regularly, attracting a growing audience that was more and more interested in her painting. She is now recognized for her work, a fact proven by the acquisition of La Partie d'échecs, the game of chess, by the French state in 1948, and by the publication of the first monography dedicated to her, written by Pierre Descartes, on the following year. After returning to Europe, Vieira da Silva continues her pictorial research centered on abstract language, but maintaining an open dialogue with figurative elements which she never abandons completely. The painter explores the construction of perspectives, resorting to the idea of the closed room that is defined by a crowd of lines and plans that go to a multiplicity of directions, disorienting and suggesting a certain vertigo in the observer. We can observe these elements, for example, in these 2 pictures, Enigma and Egypt, paintings of a complex construction, deeply marked by perspectives and by their vanishing points. These compositions are of an essentially abstract nature. However, we can define figures that move in fragmented and multidimensional spaces. Vieira da Silva creates a curious compromise between the experience of abstraction and the historical memory of several centuries of figuration in Western art. Vieira's painting is then built around the man as an internal reference and as an external observer. In addition to this research on hermetic and closed spaces, Vieira consists compositions that can be defined as panoramic urban landscapes, in which she tries new approaches to spatiality, exploring more open planes and new values of color and light. These paintings are lighter and present more flexible rhythms. Her painting evolves in cycles, and she returns regularly to the scenes and elements present in the previous works. Her technique is personal, characterized by delivery to an action painting that is intuitive and sensible, but is simultaneously calculated and rational. From the mid-50s onwards, Vieira da Silva's painting reached the conceptual maturity that confirms her position as a reference artist of the second generation of the so-called École Normale. In 1956, Vieira and Amer received French nationality. However, Vieira never abandoned the link with her country, and even Amer developed a close relationship with Portugal, whose landscapes and light he admired. Vieira would confirm in some interviews that the memory of Lisbon is a constant presence in her work. In fact, the grills, the little squares in her paintings, can be related with the tiles that cover the buildings in the Portuguese capital, or with the traditional Portuguese pavement. You can see it in the pictures. The connection between Vieira and Portugal was narrowed in the 70s, in particular after the revolution that put an end to 4 decades of dictatorship in Portugal in 1974. Vieira celebrated the revolution, and after it, she returned more often to her birth country, where she had commandments and was highly honored. Amer, her husband, died in 1985. The couple was married for 55 years, sharing their lives with a high respect for their individual artistic path. In fact, Even though their work had spatial representation in common, Vieira's and Abbas' pictorial research went in different directions. As we have seen, Vieira explored space by making it the core matter of her painting, exploring its multiplicity through an approach that reflects an understanding of painting as a rational action, as cosa mentale. In opposite, Abbas, who is described by those who knew him as a very vulnerable and sensitive man, worked with speciality mainly through the representation of nature. He creates landscapes, real or imaginary, in which light and atmosphere are central elements. His works have a clear pictorial affectivity, and there are always sensitive ties that connect the painter to the image he creates. After Abbas' death, Vieira's paintings changed. We can say that her works have a new spirituality now, explored in order to respond to her existentialist anguishes related to confrontation with pain and death. In 1992, she passed away at the age of 83. She was then, and nowadays, a very recognized international artist, represented in several museums and galleries. In Portugal, her legacy is remembered through the activity of Amer Abbas Silva Foundation, which I hope that those who have never visited it can do it one day. Thank you very much.
So, Maria Lassnig. I met Maria Lassnig in 1983. She was already over 60 and I was quite young. I was a student of her at the Art Academy, and then our relation became closer and closer, so I was with her together for 31 years. And Maria Lassnig, she was born 1919, so next year it will be her 100th birthday, and this was just 1 year after the First World War. And she grew up, and this is also a difference to Vieira da Silva, she grew up on a very, very poor farmhouse in the countryside, and she grew up with her grandmother because her mother, she had to work for a count, and she couldn't be with her, and so it was always this loss of the mother, and when she was 8 years old, then her mother took her back, and she grew up with her. So then she went during the war to the Art Academy, and of course she had no money, so she was in the countryside. It was 400 kilometers to Vienna. She took a bike and drove to Vienna with the bike and studied during the Second World War. In 1945 she finished her painting studies, and she was very lucky because the Russian army was just in front of Vienna, and she had to get out of the city because Vienna was bombed all the time. So she took the last train which was getting out of the city, and but this last train actually was bombed by the Americans, and nearly all died, but she survived, and she had to go all these kilometers back to the house of her mother in the countryside. And just after, as you see on these paintings, after the war, everything, the whole art history of the 20th century was reflected in Maria's work after the war, because she got to know the Surrealists and the movement from Paris. And in 1951, she went with Adolf Reiner together to Paris and met actually the Surrealists. And till the end of her death, she always said, yeah, André Breton kissed my hand. This was already the influence of the Paris school, because you showed a photo where it was with Jean-Paul Riopel, and she also got to know Jean-Paul Riopel in Paris. And actually in 1960 she moved to Paris. And she became a close friend of Paul Celan, the writer. And yeah, she was always really interested in literature, and she also wrote herself. Thousands of pages are still left. She wrote poetry and also small prosa-like stuff. And these were in her first paintings, 1951, so you see this influence of Helen and the others from Paris, the informal fascismus, everything came into her paintings. And what was amazing, because this is already like a head. So what is her most influential idea she discovered in art? It was this endless, more or less self-portrait, and looking inside herself, because she said, I don't need a model, I have myself, I have my own body. And this is actually in Paris, 1960, and she painted these big paintings, and they are sort out of this expressionist idea of painting, like a reflection of her body. So she called this idea of painting body awareness, because she said, there are two ways of seeing. The one is seeing with open eyes, what we see, our vision, and the other one is seeing with closed eyes, because then you look into yourself. And this introspection and inner vision, she formulated in all these paintings. So you see her body, it's a self-portrait, but there are some parts missing. And then I often ask her, why is the stomach or the belly missing in this painting? And then she said, it's missing because I didn't feel it at this time. She closed her eyes and she only painted what she could feel. This is a show in 1970, and 1968 she moved from Paris to New York, and this was a really big challenge. She was already 50 years old, and why did she go to New York? She said that it was so strange in Paris because it was so chauvinistic, and she couldn't get into this art scene. The art scene was very male-dominated, and she met an artist, Nancy Spiro, and Nancy Spiro told her, come to New York. There's this new women liberation movement, new feminism, and so she went there. What is also the most important part in Maria Lassnig's work, it's actually the female gaze on the female body. And this is something what she really discovered and formulated in her art, and this is something which is also still very important today, also for women painters. This self-empowerment to say, I'm a woman and I will present myself naked, and like also this woman Laocoon, like there's this, this classical figure of Laocoon. It's a man with the snake, but when she says, no, we as women, we also have to take on these patriarchal ideas, and we have to put ourselves into this position to become also powerful. This is where we work. And this is something very autobiographical and really touching, because it's Maria Lassnig with a more or less broken brush, and on the back there is her mother, because her mother died 10 years after, before this painting, and you see her mother coming back as a ghost, but still touching Maria from far away. So this is now something like an illustration of your thoughts. You see her in the back, in the mirror, painted with open eyes, like this normal reality, what we see, and then you see in the front of her, painting with closed eyes, this introspective inside view. This is called Woman Power, and there was a show just recently in New York called Woman Power, and this is something that was painted in 1979. She always said, yeah, it's coming out of this feminist movement idea that women have to get the power. So, and this is what is still important today is this utopian or visionary aspect of Maria Lassnig. This is a site called science fiction self-portrait, and you see herself, but already with this virtual reality glasses on. But this was painted in 1980. This was a technique in the studio. She always had to paint alone. There was nobody there, because then she really could concentrate. And she always said, yeah, I can only paint myself, like lying, when I have to lie down. So everything was experienced. And this is this idea of body awareness, so you can only paint yourself lying down when you also lie down on the floor of the canvas. This is called Death and the Maiden. This painting was quite recent. It's called You or Me. It's me.
Da ist ein zwei Totenköpfe sind da drauf.
Ach so, ja.
Und die Dinger wegen der Vergänglichkeit. Wegen der Vergänglichkeit. Ich zeige immer zu viel her.
Ja,
Jetzt schon wieder jetzt.
das glaube ich nicht. Bei mir hast du nie was gezeigt.
Nein, im Allgemeinen. Jetzt zeige ich zum Beispiel zu viel, schon zu viel.
Ach so.
So this was then the last phase of Maria Lassnig. The last phase she called herself like these drastic paintings. The idea of drastic painting, because she says, yeah, I have to exaggerate, then people will understand what I mean. This was a show in Barcelona, in the Tapies Foundation. And this is now something I want to show here for the first time. It's the last two paintings of Maria Lassnig, which are still in the studio. And she was painting more or less till her death. And because it was very amazing, like art kept her alive. This is something really what I saw. She had such a drive to paint and always to go on, and she had to go to hospital, and she was really in a weak condition, but she still wanted to paint. And at the end, I had to hold her like this, and that she could paint. So it was also a struggle till to the end. And these paintings here, they are shown now for the first time, and I think they are quite powerful, because she was already 94.5 years old.
1974 at the School of Visual Arts. This is the first time I'm ever giving a talk on Louise because I'm not really in the art world. I was her assistant from about 1974 to about the early 1980s. And this is a picture of me back in 1975 in front of her brownstone on 347 West 20th Street, which today is still the Easton Foundation right now is in that location. This is Robert Goldwater, Louise's husband. Little did I know, I didn't know it at the time, but I met Louise a year after Robert died. He was the curator of the Primitive Arts Museum in New York and also an art historian. And I met Louise in 1974. At that time, I didn't know anything about her husband. I never asked her personal questions or anything like that. For those of you that may not know Louise, this work, The Spider, is probably her most famous piece that came in the early 1990s. I only really know about Louise's work up until then. Louise, I know everything about her and everything about her life up until about the early 1980s. After that, I would keep in touch with Louise, but I never would ask her about her work. And every now and then I would go to an opening that I was invited to. But I know everything about before that period. In fact, I attended the opening of the recent show at the Museum of Modern Art, and I was pretty astonished at the amount of work that was there. Much of it, of course, most of it I didn't even know except for this early work. So here's another picture of Louise. This one I took most of these photographs that you'll see I took because at the time I was an art student and I had a photography class, and these were taken by, at the time we didn't have digital photographs, they were just slides. I would take slides and I would take a lot of slides for Louise and she would look at the slides, and that was an important process of her work. So there's actually very few photos. That photo that you saw of me was the only one I really knew about except for two that you'll see later. This picture here, she's in her latex period here. This is a picture photo that was taken by the New York photographer Wayne Hansen, Wayne Michaels, yes. I was there when she took the picture because many times when she would have visitors, I would be there to open the door and to greet them, and so that she wouldn't be alone when people visited the house. So this piece is called The Destruction of the Father, and it was one of the latex pieces. This was all the way downstairs in her sub-basement for a long time, and I installed this. This piece was made, most of the work that I worked on with Louise was already made. It was refurbishing pieces that had been made previously. We're installing it in this particular case. I installed this up in the Grand Concourse in the Bronx at some museum, and this is another piece of it. In 1978, this is a fashion show. In 1978, Louise had two shows. Oh, I should say one of the most important things about Louise is at that time when I was working with her, nobody knew who she was. She was not famous at all. She was just one of many artists in New York. I had no idea that she would become as famous as she did or as important as she did. And so in 1978, she had two shows simultaneously. One at the Hamilton Gallery where this banquet performance piece took place, and at the Fourcade Gallery, Xavier Fourcade was her dealer, and at the same time she had these two shows that were about the same time. This was a performance, and she had some of her work shown here. This is a photograph of Bert Schiff, who was, I guess, an art historian. I'm not sure exactly what he did, but I know that his name means something to people. Originally Louise wanted me to be in the performance, but I told her I wasn't going to wear one of those costumes and go in front of people and that. So it was just as good because I helped backstage, because there was a lot to do helping people get in those costumes. You can imagine their rubber costumes, trying to slip those onto people's naked bodies needed a lot of talcum powder and grease to get them on. and they would tear, so there was a lot of repairing and a lot of things to do backstage. So I was backstage here. The character in the front, that guy there was a guy named Boris. I remember him. He was a little strange, and he played the violin during that. There was some music and singing. Susan Cooper, who you'll see in a few minutes, did some singing. And it was an interesting, the pieces here, of course it doesn't work there, but anyway, the table, you have parts of that, the destruction of the father, the previous piece that you saw on the table. She would have, on the table downstairs, it was a table in her workshop, and she had these latex things laid out when I was there. She was working on them. She would use these bowls, these metal salad bowls, and use cheesecloth and coat them with latex and make these costumes. So, more pictures of the fashion show. This is a guy named Robbie Tillotson. Louise had a lot of visitors at the time. He was an interesting, Louise liked to be around young people. And he was a painter. He unfortunately died early, but he was actually a very good painter, and he used to come and visit. This is Robbie being put on big makeup. So she liked to have a lot of young people around, and she liked to have visitors. So we'll go on a little bit more. Here's another piece. This is Susan Cooper, and she's still around, and I saw her at one of the openings a couple years ago. And here she is again. So one of the reasons why Louise liked working with me is because after the class, it was a printmaking class, and it was in the fall of 1974. The class was over, and then I happened to get a call from her that she asked me if I could come over and help her do something. So I went over. And I fixed some kind of, I think it was a cabinet or something. I had no idea. I never asked her about her work. I never asked her. I was very quiet and shy at the time. And whatever she told me to do, I would just do. So I would never question her about what it was. She would say, here's this, can you fix that door, take that off, do that. Then I would just do it, whatever she asked. She was, paying me to work, so I did it. And the other thing is I wouldn't question her a lot. I would just, like most people, when they would do work for somebody, she would say, well, here, take this piece of wood and cut it. And, I would just cut it. I wouldn't ask her. Most people would say, well, how long do you want it? But I just kind of just did it, and that's the way. And so I never really questioned her because she wasn't sure about when she was working on something. I think she wasn't sure it was a process for her, so she had to see it. So it was experimental always for her. So that's why I never talked much, and I never asked her any questions. Never asked her about her work or anything. So many times I would work on something. I had no idea whether it was a piece or it was a repair for her house. And the other thing is I had a camera, so most of these pictures I took. This is at the Fort Cod Gallery. I took this picture. It's one of my favorite pictures that I took of her. And the Fort Cod Gallery had a lot of these totem pole pieces that were created mostly in the 1940s and 50s, I guess. And they had to be upkept. They were like in her basement. A lot of her work was kept in her. She only had that house at the time at 347 West 20th Street. So these pieces needed to be painted. And one of the big issues with these pieces is that they needed bases. And originally, here's another picture of that one. And that's at the Fort Cod Gallery here. So a lot of these pieces tended to be very top heavy. You see that spiral, it was they were on a pole. Here's another piece, it's on a pole, you see. So the pole, well, Fort Cod originally Louise wanted Fort Cod to drill holes in his floor, in that beautiful floor in the gallery on East 77th Street. His gallery was right near the old Whitney, I think, on East 77th Street. And Fort Cod wouldn't do it. And I guess Louise was a little upset about that, so we had to find bases. And I was always trying different bases because she was never happy. She would have preferred the pieces not to have a base. So that was one of the problems. And the other problem was, if you look at that piece, you see how top heavy it was. She would rather have them not even had a stick on the bottom. She would like that to be invisible. So she wanted it to be very, very thin, and they used to sway like this. So I can't tell you how many rods and different things we tried to get them to stand up straight like that, and how many Quarantina, this piece here on the right, and the other one. I would say these are my two, even to this day, I would say these are two of my favorite pieces of Louise's. I'll tell you an interesting story. When I think of Louise, I think many people I've heard that some people thought that she was mean and that she had a temper and all that, but I only know Louise as one of the sweetest people that you would ever know. And she was very down to earth, really, really down to earth. So in the late 70s, she had a show, she was in a group show at the Whitney, visit the Whitney, so it was the winter time. We came, we went to the show, and her piece was on the second floor, so I remember going up there, went with Jean-Louis, who was her son, Louise, and I. So it was the winter, so we had coats. So she took the coats, and she put them right behind the piece over there like that. I thought that was like really, even as young as I was, I thought that was kind of interesting. She was just like a really down-to-earth person. So this is called Partial Recall. I have a lot of experience on this piece. This was the Museum Modern Art cover of a show that she had there in, I guess it was the late maybe it was 1981 or 82. But the Fourcade show was 1978, and this piece was built in her basement, or it was in a basement, and it was lots of little of these heavy pieces of wood. This is a piece much later. And when it was built, it was like a house of cards, because she would say, move this up a little bit higher. She would move it up, we'd put a little piece of wood under it, put this down a little bit, take it away. So there was a million pieces. So this piece was in the Fourcade show at that same time in 1978 when the performance piece was going on. This was, as you walked in the door, it was to the right, the first piece that you saw. And I was putting it together in the gallery at that time. And see, this is the wood that it was cut out of. You could see it was very heavy wood, and these pieces were balanced up there. And it was about 2 hours before the show was supposed to open, and this piece just came tumbling down. It was like with a big crash. And I remember Fourcade walking in the room because it was a big noise. He comes down, he took one look, walked away. Louise comes in the room, takes one look, walks away. So I just scrambled to get the piece together, because at that time I remember, I guess John Russell was an important critic at the time, and he was due to be there that evening, and somehow I managed to get the piece back together. And there I am in 82. This was in her studio in Brooklyn, and this was from that museum. That was the only, and here I am in Brooklyn, putting the piece together so that it could be secured. Now, one habit that Louise had was that she would, when I was working with her, is Louise never had a sense of a piece being finished. So if a piece would be shown, it would be shown in a gallery or somewhere, and when it would get back to the studio, she would like take little pieces of it and use it for something else. She had no concept of like finishing a piece or fame or the value of what the work would be. She just worked. It was all a process for her. So if she could use something that she already used in a piece, she would take it and use it. Well, later on, when Jerry became her assistant, he managed to put it into that and was able to control Louise that way. Here's some more. I'm securing the piece so that it could be, so there I am. And here, 35 years later, that's me with Rob Storr, and that's up at Yale. Rob is he's at Yale. He's the dean of the Yale Art School now. I met Rob back in the early 1980s when he first started to come around in the late 1990s. And now the piece is owned by Rob, so he has the piece. Now here we have marble pieces. This is her marble period. And I took that picture. This is out in East Hampton, this picture here. I was with her, I drove her out there, and the pieces were delivered out there. I don't even know why. I don't know if she sold them, I had no idea. I just go, she would just say, well, we're going to East Hampton, because I had a car, so I would drive her around to these different places, and there she is in East Hampton, and there were two big marble pieces. Obviously, they were very heavy, and some truck delivered them there. And there I am back, and that's probably in the 1980s. So she worked a lot in marble, and she would go to Italy. I almost went once or twice, but I couldn't go. She was still working on some marble pieces when I started working with her. This is a piece called the No March, and this is a photograph from the Whitney Museum of Art where it was shown. And of course, it was not attached to anything. These were just loose little pieces that were assembled on the floor of the Whitney. And when the show was over, they were all just collected up and put into a wooden crate. And of course, there were no numbers or pattern or anything like that. They were just like a big, like taking a jigsaw puzzle and taking it apart and dumping it in the box. That's what it was. So, to give you an idea, it was like maybe, I don't know, 1,000 of these little squares. And there it is in the Storm King Art Center. So, apparently the piece was sold to the Storm King Art Center. And I went with Louise. That's up in, it's about an hour drive from New York. And they had an outdoor garden. They may still do. I don't even know if it's still there. The piece I think I heard was still there, but they don't have it outside. Here it is outside. So I went with Louise to. She went the first day, and we uncrated it. And I only had about 4 or 5 of these bad photographs that I had to assemble this thing like a big jigsaw puzzle, trying to figure out the best that I could to get it together. And then the staff they mounted it on a base, and that was permanently installed. This was my little bill that I sent to Storm King I got paid $125 for that job, which was a lot of money, I guess, then, but I should have charged more. So there's a piece at the Storm King on the bottom. On the top is the original one at the Whitney. So Louise received an honorary doctorate at Yale, and I guess this was she invited me to come. I drove her up there, so I guess that was in 1977. So, and along with Louise receiving the honorary doctorate was President Ford and B.B. King, who was in that picture. So it was the first time the only time really I met a president and really had dinner in the same room. I sat next to Louise and her sons. This is Jean-Louis. And that's her, and that's on the right is Alan. Alan was a federal judge in New York for many years, and he's a photographer and a talented artist himself. We'll go back to Jean. Jean-Louis he's still, both of these sons are still living. Jean-Louis was an art historian and a writer, and he wrote a couple books. In particular, he was interested in the architecture of Mali, and he wrote some book with his late wife. And the most interesting character is the one that's blackened out. That was done by Louise. I don't know why she did it. Maybe she didn't like his profile, but this little character here was Michel, her adopted son. And he would have been, well, he was quite old. He was older than the other ones. He unfortunately died fairly young. Maybe he was in his 60s when he died. But he would visit Louise often. And he was adopted in Paris by Robert and Louise, so he was the oldest son. And he would stop by the house, and he was really interesting because he was a very, very tough character. And in the middle of the winter, he would show up in just short pants, and it would be freezing out. And anyway, here is another piece, a metal piece. This is in New Hampshire. This piece was sold to New Hampshire, and I went up there with her when it was being installed. I drove her up. Here is some more pictures. I took these pictures. This is how she envisioned it. So one of the early studies, I guess. She had these wood pieces. Now, a lot of this wood stuff, again, she had this bandsaw downstairs, and it was like very rickety, and she would cut these big thick pieces of wood in there, and then I would cut it, and I was always really terrified when she would cut something because I was afraid that she was going to get hurt, and even myself, because the blade would either snap or it would just roll off, and it would be a big noise, horrible noise. But anyway, she managed, and we all managed to survive. The other thing was drilling. She had a drill press because we were always drilling holes for these bases. So eventually I worked less and less with her. I kept in touch with her. And then I would visit her, but I never really saw her. She never showed me her work. I would visit her, you know, on a very regular basis over her whole life because I was very close with her. And in early 1990, she did a performance called She Lost It at the Fabric Workshop. And she asked me, it was a performance piece, so she asked me, I'm a magician and I used to do, I did magic. At the time that I was working with her, I never did any magic in the 1980s for her. I just went and did my job. But she asked me if I could do some magic piece in this. Well, first she asked me if I could, you'll see, let's see, this is the fact, we'll get back to that. This is part of the performance. She wanted me to be in my underwear and be in a performance like that. I said, that's not going to happen. So I said, I'll do a magic trick. And she said, okay, do a magic trick. So I opened the piece with this magic trick. So we'll show a little video here.
She grew littler and littler. He's holding a pea. Once.
And then, if you see on the right, wrapped up over there is Rob's store, wrapped up like a cocoon in a cocoon. I don't know how he did it, because he had to stay, he had to be in that cocoon while I was doing the show. You know, obviously it was all set up ahead of time, and he was in that thing. I would have went crazy. And then that's Jerry, the center person in the center is Jerry Gorbnoy, who is the person that still, for all the years after I was her assistant, it was not only his assistant, but helped with managing her affairs, and still today runs the whole Louise, all of her works and everything. So this was unwrapped, and on that fabric was written the poem, and it was a little bit almost like a fashion show where they were displaying these different things on the coats. And that's Rob's store being unwrapped, and they were actually wrapping somebody else. I don't know if that's in that picture. He was being unwrapped and somebody else was being wrapped. And then that's the cast And sitting alongside Jean-Louis is Carolee, his late wife, and the person on the right is Louise. I guess on Louise's right is Anne de Harnecourt, who was also being honored that night. And to her right is Debbie Y, who I met, who also came into the picture around the time when I started working with Louise. And she's an art historian, and I guess it's a name that's known to some people. This is a picture that I took of her in a workshop downstairs. I think we're going a little long, so another picture. These are some pictures in her house, in her basement. All these pictures I took. That's a picture of me. She took that of me. Okay. And one of my favorite pictures also that I took of Louise here. She also did prints. This is a print that she gave me back then, and this is maybe one of my favorite prints of hers. And her birthday was on Christmas, and every Christmas she would have a few friends and family over, so I would always go for Christmas, and I would do some magic and sit alongside her. This, I think, is in 2000, could be 2009, and here I'm doing some magic. This was a film by Bridget Cornon, who was very close with Louise for the last 20 years of her life and took care of her, basically. And she's a filmmaker living in Paris, and this was a little magic trick that I did on. This is probably also back in the 90s. Let's see if we can get this to work here.
Maybe I have to try again one more
This,
time.
I think it's in the early 90s.
Let's take that card. Let's take a card.
Faut pas essayer de m'influencer.
Let's take it.
Ils essayent de m'influencer, hein.
What was the 7 of diamonds again?
Ça, non, mais il ne faut pas faire de confusion. C'est ma carte favorite, mais ce n'est pas la carte que je viens de montrer.
It wasn't the 7 of diamonds?
Non.
Maybe.
Ah, c'est... Pardon, qu'est-ce que vous voulez que je fasse? On recommence?
Well, I do have a card in my pocket here. Maybe it was that one. This one. What was the name of your card?
C'était, je crois que c'était le 6 de pique. Oui, c'est formidable.
Oh.
C'est très formidable.
And that was a picture taken in November, maybe 2009, only like a few months before she died. And Bridget took these photographs. So I can tell you my favorite trick that I used to perform for Louise, and it would be when people would come over. And again, it was only when I would visit her and other people would be there or at her birthday, because when I was working with her in the 1980s, 70s and 80s, I didn't do any magic at all. I just helped her with her work. So I would amaze everybody with this trick. I would just take one card and I would put it on the table and I would ask Louise, name any card. And she would name the card, I turned it over, and it was always a hit. It was amazing. Really, people were astonished. Well, it was a fairly simple trick if you knew Louise, because out of 52 cards, if you ask Louise to, well, name a color, she's going to always name red. It's impossible for her to name black, so now I'm down to 26 cards. And her favorite number was 7. That was pretty easy. And then, of course, between a diamond and a heart, she's going to name a heart. So all I have to do is put the 7 of diamonds out, and it would hit every time. And then, of course, she would never remember the next time I did it. So anyway, that's about the end of the talk, and I think if anybody has any questions for any of the panel, I think that's the question